There are plenty of studies in the field of psychiatry that delve into why people believe the things they do and how hard it is to truly change someone's opinion, no matter how much evidence you think you have to back up your position. But I believe this kind of behavior my friends here demonstrated, in terms of automatically rejecting anything that doesn't fit one's worldview without a second of consideration, is unacceptable and just dangerous for the overall survival of democracy. And I know that sounds extreme, but just let me explain. The foundation of any healthy democracy is an informed citizenry, and as I explained in a previous episode, there are plenty of forces in this world and this country that are actively trying to suppress certain information and ensure that large swaths of this country are misinformed about some of the most pressing issues we face today, in the same way that large companies encourage misinformed consumers so that they can actually buy their products. For example, less than a fifth of Americans know that the scientific community overwhelmingly agrees that climate change is real and caused by humans, not to mention an even higher percentage of young people think that the world is flat. With such large portions of the country deeply misinformed on things as basic as these concepts, how can we possibly expect our government to address complex problems like a warming planet that often require complicated solutions? This lack of both attention and appreciation for facts can be extremely costly, as this administration has demonstrated over the last year with regards to its response to the coronavirus pandemic. When citizens refuse to acknowledge reality, it matters because it enables leaders who are equally uninterested in listening to experts before making their decisions to gain power. The Trump administration has literally followed the exact same playbook that modern Republicans have followed with regards to other important issues, including the one I mentioned, climate change, that has led us to where we are today. First, for example, Trump outright denied the very existence of the coronavirus threat despite overwhelming evidence at his disposal. Then, once the virus was widespread in the US, he acknowledged it, but focused all of his attention on blaming China and delegitimizing its true impact on Americans. Then, after months of fighting with his public health officials while focusing most of his energy and time controlling the PR fallout of increasing deaths around the country, Trump claimed to have known about its severity all along and constantly bragged about shutting the borders to Chinese travelers while insisting nothing more could have been done. Now, even today, despite record high rates of infections and deaths not seen anywhere else in the world, Trump continues to hamstring those who are actively trying to address the growing problem because those efforts could jeopardize his image as a strong and effective leader. Now, obviously, Trump did not cause the pandemic, but how he has responded to it is a fucking joke. And you literally just have to look at how other countries around the world have responded to see this. Countries with far less resources and expertise have successfully contained the virus months ago, enabling their economies to almost fully reopen. And although there is some truth to the fact that, a lot of these countries have smaller populations with far fewer international travelers, the US accounts for about a quarter of all cases worldwide, despite being home to only about 5% of the world's population. So that excuse just doesn't really hold water. No serious public health expert would say this administration has done a competent job at addressing the pandemic, and history will judge Donald Trump's response extremely poorly. Yet, if you ask any Trump supporter, they would probably tell you that Trump did all he could and that China is to blame, and that, the liberal media is just attacking him because they hate him, or that the coronavirus is still a hoax. It doesn't matter that 22 of the top 25 states in the US with the highest number of cases per million residents are Republican states, or that the state of North Dakota alone has the highest number of fatalities per capita than any country around the world, and nearly 1,000 Americans are dying every day from the virus. Nothing has seemed to lift the spell cast over Trump supporters that still has them convinced that this pandemic is not a legitimate concern and part of a larger liberal conspiracy to oust Trump from office. Now, I was naive originally in thinking that statistics like these, or the fact that Trump's team suggested allowing upwards of 70% of the population become infected as a potential solution, which, by the way, would have resulted in upwards of 2 million deaths, was enough to convince these people that we should have been listening to scientists all along. But no, support for Trump has remained undeniably stable. Trump's negligence has led to more American deaths than every war since World War II combined. Yet his approval rating among registered Republicans has never dipped below 85%, and today remains at about 91, 92%. This is the kind of behavior I have only seen demonstrated in a cult, and the only solution I see is education. By education, I don't mean getting a college degree, although it is worth noting that Trump won the majority of less educated voters, as do most Republican candidates. But anyways, by education, I mean becoming better informed about everyday issues and the world around us so that it's easier for voters to identify demagogues like Trump who constantly make lofty promises without ever actually delivering on them, and reject him for the fraud that he is. Like I said earlier, though, this requires actually opening the door to being wrong and hearing opposing arguments. However, in today's fractured news media environment, there's literally an audience for any belief, and it's entirely possible for someone to completely immerse themselves into a specific community so that they perceive anything outside of that community as illegitimate. For anyone who's studied Scientology, for example, which for whatever reason is a passion of mine, you will learn that much of that organization's efforts to maintain its membership is by constantly cutting off its members from the outside world and discouraging any kind of independent questioning of the information that they are presented with on a daily basis. I once went to the Scientology church's headquarters in LA and tried asking a member about his access to the internet, for example, and his sly smirk and just overall dismissal of my questioning was much like that which I've experienced when trying to confront some of my more conservative Trump-loving friends with similar questions about their beliefs. Much of this behavior, I believe, is the result of Trump and conservative media overall just playing the victim card and trying to convince their loyal supporters that it's them against the world and that they must automatically distrust any info that doesn't come straight from them, or else the consequences could be severe. It's essentially the same reason I just hate religion, for using fear and uncertainty to convince people to suspend rational and logical thinking, which are necessary for seeing through bullshit tactics like convincing people that failure to adhere to their line of thinking will result in a fiery hellscape controlled by Satan, or in the sense of Trumpism, a communist hellscape controlled by Joe Biden and George Soros. And if you think I'm being over dramatic here, just keep in mind that I've subscribed to Trump campaign emails and numerous far-right daily newsletters for years, and the kind of fear-mongering that people behind these fundraising efforts employ on a daily basis, not to mention the rhetoric coming straight from Trump and many top Republicans seeking to rile up their base, is intense. During the Republican National Convention, for example, speaker after speaker insisted that life under a Biden presidency would be a dystopian police state where Democrats will take away your guns, empty the prisons, lock you inside all day, and invite MS-13 to move in with you. So it's not entirely surprising that the average Trump supporter literally thinks Democrats like Hillary Clinton are the devil and are willing to overlook the constant corruption, chaos, and just general insanity that has defined the Trump administration up to now. Given that in their minds, if Biden wins, which he did, America as they know it will die. In the minds of the average Trumper, Donald Trump is literally all that stands between them and just cultural revolution. And when the ends justify the means, Trump supporters will tolerate anything he does, including making hush money payments to porn stars and engaging in sexually predatory behavior, to inviting America's adversaries to interfere in our elections, to pressuring American allies to dig up dirt on the president's opponent, to cozying up to some of the worst dictators in the world, to peddling crazed conspiracy theories and mishandling a pandemic at the cost of over 230,000 fucking lives. I mean, honestly, at this point, Donald Trump literally could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, as he once joked about, and half this country would either call it fake news or come up with some elaborate backstory about how, the victim was justified in being murdered. I don't know. You kind of get my point, though, right? The modern GOP has just become the very definition of a cult of personality, in that it stands for none of its previous ideals or organizing principles, that being, limited government, free enterprise, fiscal restraint. And instead, it has just filled that vacuum with a lazy identity-based populism, which basically states, as long as it agitates the base or serves to alienate, sturdy real Americans from those delicate coastal elites, then it's got a place in the party. The GOP used to be a party of personal responsibility and small government, but it has become one defined only by opposition to liberal America and just fealty to a man who demands loyalty but is quick to distance himself from literally anyone who is even the slightest bit critical of him. I guess I can't be too angry here because this attraction towards Trump is largely evolutionary behavior in that when threatened, people retreat into tribalism and become more insular and defensive, while also supportive of their perceived leader. This unfortunately creates a negative feedback loop that further discourages any introspection and increases the need for a clear enemy, like Democrats or the media, for example. It doesn't matter that Biden is a moderate Democrat, notable for his success over the course of his political career in forging alliances with many Republicans, because acknowledging that he is, in fact, not an existential threat means that admitting that one's support of a man who is so obviously a moral train wreck has been flawed from the beginning. And once in a tribe or a cult, it's pretty hard to justify leaving, even if that means your own demise. And again, just do any research on cults and you'll see kind of exactly what I'm talking about. I will say, this kind of behavior is not confined to Republicans. For example, the degree to which a lot of Democrats chose to overlook Bill Clinton's predatory behavior and then smear the reputation of his accusers back in the 90s is an example of how this primal behavior is bipartisan. But the main difference is that Trump is different because his corruption literally pervades every aspect of his life now and always has. The polarization and political tribalism that we have seen under his watch the last 4 years are not new to America. I mean, fear and hatred of our fellow citizens has been increasing for decades, but Donald Trump's relentless assault on truth and the overall institutions of democracy, not to mention his just fundamental incompetence and emotional instability, are unlike anything we've seen before, and his supporters cannot say, as they did in 2016, that they just didn't know, because we've had 4 years of this shit, and now we know. At least those of us outside of the cult are willing to acknowledge it. Earlier this year, Howard Stern said he hates Trump supporters because they don't realize that Trump hates people like them. And while that's almost certainly true, I mean, let's be honest, just look at who can actually afford or is allowed on any one of his properties. I can't really blame these folks when I see the forces at play and just constantly deceiving them and how much effort there's placed into convincing them to believe, that up is down. It's the same reason I don't hate Scientologists for following a cult that has been linked to child abuse, tax fraud, misogyny, because at the end of the day, those people likely joined out of a desire for a sense of community, much like how I assume many Trump supporters feel about their current movement. For any of my Trump fans listening, just know that I'm fully aware that many of you are good people who care about your country and the well-being of strangers, but my efforts to convince you to come into the light, so to speak, are not intended to be an attack on your character. It's just to demonstrate how I truly believe that your political choices are endangering my life and are not reflective in any way of the person that I know you to be. I've been to numerous Trump rallies and talked to good folks, and I'm genuinely curious how these people can defend supporting a president who just so obviously reflects everything that I know many of them resent. Like greed, corruption, indecency, and just a complete lack of morality. I'm not even going to get into everything Trump has done to demonstrate these character flaws because, to be honest, there are just too many to count. And at this point, if you still consider him to be looking out for your self-interest and those of the average man or woman, then you just need to turn off Fox News, because without first doing so, I'm not confident there's much more I can say that would convince you otherwise. Again, I understand this is easier said than done, and I know those who support Trump believe that you have, in fact, taken the red pill and see the world clearly while everyone else does not. But viewers of Fox News are consistently the least informed out of any cable news audience, and that enables extremely popular pundits like Tucker Carlson and Sean Hannity to consistently lie without ever being held accountable by their audience. But Fox is more dangerous than that because it also throws fuel on the flames of negative partisanship and division in this country, which again I know is bipartisan, but it has led to a complete breakdown of trust. I can understand that a lot of Republicans voted for Trump in 2016 purely out of disdain for Democrats, woke culture, and just a changing American demographic. But after 4 years of this constant bullying and incitement from our president and all the strife that it has created in today's society, I just kind of hoped more people would realize the actual dangerousness of this style of leadership. I mean, if you can even call it that.